Untold Hollywood Stories. Subscribe now. In the golden age of Hollywood westerns, one man stood out with a face so sharp it could cut glass, and eyes so cold they seemed to pierce right through you. Lee Van Cleef was never the classic Hollywood hero. He was the villain, the outlaw, the man audiences loved to hate. But behind that unforgettable glare was a story few people truly knew. A life marked by hardship, personal tragedy, addiction, scandal, and a shocking ending that left fans stunned. This is the tragic life and scandalous ending of Lee Van Cleef. Lee Van Cleef was born on January 9, 1925, in Somerville, New Jersey. The son of a working-class family, Lee grew up during the Great Depression, a time when survival meant resilience. His father, Clarence, was a local painter and house builder, while his mother, Marion, kept the household running. From a young age, Lee didn't fit the mold of a typical child star in the making. He wasn't handsome in the traditional Hollywood sense, nor did he have the smooth voice or leading man charm. Instead, he had sharp, hawk-like features, piercing eyes, and a toughness that came from real-life struggles. Growing up, he developed two passions that would define his life: a love for the arts and a fascination with military service. When World War II erupted, Van Cleef, like many young men of his generation, felt the call of duty. He enlisted in the United States Navy at just 17 years old. Assigned to a minesweeper, he served bravely in the Mediterranean and earned several commendations. But more importantly, the Navy instilled in him a discipline and grit that he would later carry into Hollywood. When the war ended, Lee returned home, but life wasn't easy. Like so many veterans, he struggled to find his place in a changing America. That's when fate intervened. Van Cleef began his acting career in the early 1950s almost by accident. While working as an accountant and painter to pay the bills, he joined a local theater group. His sharp features caught the eye of a talent scout, and soon Hollywood came knocking. But there was one problem: his look. Lee Van Cleef didn't look like a hero. He didn't have the smooth charm of Cary Grant or the rugged handsomeness of John Wayne. Instead, directors saw him as something different: the villain. And so, Lee Van Cleef became typecast. His first major film appearance came in High Noon 1952, where he played the silent, menacing gunfighter Jack Colby. He didn't speak a single word in the film, but his presence was unforgettable. His hawk-like nose, sharp cheekbones, and deadly eyes made him Hollywood's go-to villain. Throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, Van Cleef appeared in dozens of westerns and crime dramas. He was the bandit, the outlaw, the killer, always lurking in the background, rarely the star. This constant typecasting frustrated him. He wanted more. But Hollywood had already placed him in a box he couldn't escape. By the mid-1960s, Van Cleef's career had begun to fade. He was appearing in lower-budget films, struggling to make ends meet, and even considered quitting acting altogether. Then came the opportunity that would change everything. Italian director Sergio Leone was reinventing the Western genre with his gritty spaghetti westerns. After the massive success of A Fistful of Dollars starring Clint Eastwood, Leone needed a strong, menacing presence to play opposite Eastwood in the sequel. For a few dollars more, 1965. Lee Van Cleef was his choice. The role of Colonel Douglas Mortimer transformed Van Cleef's career. For the first time, he wasn't just a nameless villain. He was a fully fleshed-out character with depth, charisma, and intelligence. Audiences around the world fell in love with him. His cold stare, quick draw, and commanding presence became legendary. Soon after, Leone cast him again in The Good, The Bad and the Ugly 1966, where Van Cleef played Angel Eyes, perhaps his most iconic role. Standing alongside Clint Eastwood and Eli Wallach, Van Cleef cemented his place in cinema history. For once, he wasn't just a supporting actor, he was a star. But while his career in Europe was flourishing, his personal life was falling apart. Despite his newfound fame, Lee Van Cleef's life off-screen was marked by heartbreak, scandal, and self-destructio. He had married his high school sweetheart, Patsy Ruth, in 1943, but the pressures of Hollywood and his constant absences strained the marriage. They divorced in 1958, leaving Lee devastated. In 1960, he remarried Joan Drain, hoping for stability. But instead, this marriage spiraled into chaos. Reports surfaced of violent arguments, financial troubles, and infidelity. Hollywood insiders whispered about Lee's drinking problem, which was worsening by the year. On set, directors admired his professionalism, but off-set, alcohol was consuming him. Then, in 1959, tragedy struck. Van Cleef was involved in a near-fatal car accident that left him with severe injuries, including a damaged knee. Doctors told him his acting career was likely over. For years, he walked with a limp, relying on painkillers and alcohol to get through the day. Yet somehow, against all odds, he made a comeback. The spaghetti westerns reignited his career, but his personal demons never left. By the 1970s, the spaghetti western boom was fading. Hollywood had moved on, and once again, Van Cleef found himself typecast. He took roles in low-budget action films and exploitation movies, far from the glory of Leone's masterpieces. Financial troubles haunted him. Divorces left him nearly broke, and his drinking worsened. Friends recalled how he would sit alone at bars, staring into his glass, a shadow of the man he once was. By the 1980s, Van Cleef's health had sharply declined. Years of heavy smoking and drinking had taken their toll. He developed chronic heart disease and emphysema. Still, he tried to keep working. In 1984, he starred in Escape from New York alongside Kurt Russell, a small but memorable role. But it was clear his body was failing him. Lee Van Cleef's final years were shrouded in sadness and scandal. By the mid-1980s, his relationships had all but collapsed. Rumors swirled of affairs, money owed, and family disputes. Hollywood had largely forgotten him. The man who once stood tall alongside Clint Eastwood now struggled to land even minor roles. On December 16, 1989, Lee Van Cleef passed away at just 64 years old. The official cause of death was a heart attack, but his emphysema and years of addiction had weakened him beyond repair. What shocked fans, however, was what came after. Reports surfaced of bitter disputes over his estate. His widow, Barbara, whom he had married in 1976, clashed with his children from previous marriages over money, property, and rights to his films. The tabloids called it the Van Cleef scandal, painting a tragic picture of family torn apart in the wake of his death. To this day, questions linger about his final years, the financial troubles, the broken relationships, and the scandals that overshadowed his legacy. Despite the tragedy and scandal, Lee Van Cleef remains one of the most iconic faces in cinema history. His roles in The Good, The Bad and the Ugly, and For a Few Dollars More, are etched into the DNA of the Western genre. He proved that a man didn't need to be conventionally handsome or charming to become a star. All he needed was presence, and Lee Van Cleef had it, but few are as haunting as that of Lee Van Cleef. He came from nothing, became a legend, and left this world far too soon. His eyes, his glare, his unforgettable presence. They remain, frozen in time, on the silver screen. This was the tragic life and scandalous ending